So it's Mental Health Awareness Week and Dr. Sharma can't be with us this week. So we thought we'd take the opportunity for me to talk as a person who has Factor V Leiden and has had the impact blood clots and blood clot disorders in the family, to talk about how it affected me mentally, something we probably haven't explored enough. So we're going to dive in. Martin's going to ask me 10 questions and I'm going to give the best answers that I can, understanding that how I feel is not how other people will or should feel at all. It's just my story. We'd really love it if you could tell us how you feel. That would really help.
When you first found out you had a clotting condition, how did you feel? What were those first days and weeks like emotionally?
How I felt when I heard from the clinic that I had Factor V Leiden. I felt so many things, and then I felt like I felt nothing at all. It was unbelievable. I didn't know there was such a thing as a blood clotting disorder that you could get through the family. I'd heard of haemophilia, didn't really know what it was, but I hadn't heard of its opposite, thrombophilia, which is the tendency to clot, and that's what I had. And being told at a clinic that wanted to provide my IVF service that I couldn't have IVF because of the disorder, that meant that in the nicest possible way I ceased to be of interest to them, that there was nothing that they could do for me. And because it was private, I'm not sure that they even told my GP, and the GP didn't follow up and nothing happened. So to this day I'm not under any kind of supervision other than the aspirin. So I was a bit dismissed. I felt in some ways relieved that I had an understanding of why I was having so many problems conceiving, and I felt a little bit, I know it's not a reasonable thing to think, but at the time I thought it's not my fault, and so that gave some help to the fact that I felt a failure. But it also meant that was the end of my journey for having a child. I didn't even consider what the further implications were. I didn't really contemplate that. I was, I think, subsumed by the fertility issues. But I remember, and knowing we were going to do this, I gave some thought to it, and I remember driving a couple of days after on my own in the car, and a Take That song came on, The Flood, and that's when I broke, and that's when I was in floods of tears listening to The Flood. And so I've got some of the lyrics because it stayed with me. I'll never hear that song without thinking about this time. So I've got them. Although no one understood, we were holding back the flood, learning how to dance in the rain. We were holding back the flood. They said we'd never dance again. And that's how I felt, that nothing would ever be good again, because this would always be with me and it would always mean that I couldn't have children. So the fear didn't come at that point. The worry didn't come. It was more devastation and isolation. I felt quite alone with it.
When the anxiety hit, where did you go for help? Were there resources or people that helped you make sense of it all?
I didn't really feel like I had anywhere to go except the internet. Googling, they say you shouldn't, but what else could I do? So I did spend a fair bit of time Googling to understand it, and also joining groups. So I've been members of various Facebook support groups for people who've got Factor V Leiden for years. And actually the posts that you see from people are the same all the time. People saying, I've got these symptoms, or I've got this mark on my leg, or this bruise. Do you think it's a clot? And none of us are equipped to say whether it's a clot or not. But people feel like they can't go to the emergency room, they can't go to A&E, depending where they are in the world, for different reasons, but they can't go unless it really is a clot. So they want some way of knowing and understanding, but it isn't available. So we turn to each other and try and advise each other best we can. It's absolutely not ideal, not always helpful. Some of the advice is so wrong as well, and people get the wrong end of the stick, and can be quite dangerous. but really supportive.
What were some of the early signs or symptoms that made you worry something was wrong?
So I didn't really have any early warning signs that something was wrong in respect to my blood, or at least it was recognisable to me. The only thing that had happened to me was recurrent miscarriage. And today it's recognised that maybe Factor V Leiden impacts early pregnancy. Back then, I'm talking, 15 years ago, a bit more, nearly 20. Back then, it was thought that it didn't have any impact on early pregnancy. So the link wasn't really seen, even though to me it had to be related to that. It wasn't generally accepted that it was just that I couldn't have IVF. So I didn't really have symptoms myself. My dad's symptoms were very non-standard symptoms as well. And we hadn't then put together that maybe that's what had happened to Grandma as well, that her strokes had somehow been related. All of that came later. So I've probably spent about 20 years getting my head around the implications for me of blood clots in my family. But I do know the signs to look out for in a typical situation. So if you got swelling of your calf, if you get redness of your calf, you can feel some heat in it, it's discoloured. And I think people talk about feeling like a crampy feeling, a bit like a Charlie horse. But so often people aren't sure, is it? Could it be? People get cramp in the calf quite often and it isn't a blood clot. So it's really hard to know. And I think that's one of the things that is really stressful.
What was going through your mind before you went to the hospital? Did you hesitate at all, and why?
You don't want to seem like a hypochondriac. You don't want to seem like you're running to the hospital all of the time. You can't afford to go to the hospital all the time, as I said. So it can just bounce around off your brain. Because if it is and you leave it, then you are putting your life at risk if you don't get any treatment for it. But actually, in my working life, I've been a commercial director for a long time before I did this, and we talk about risk in projects and things, and you think the risk here is quite low, that I've actually got a clot, but the impact, if I have, is so serious. So when you measure risk, you think about risk and impact, the likelihood of the risk and the impact if that risk happened. They're two separate things. So risk of it being a clot might be quite low. It's not going to be, 9 times out of 10 not a clot. That's not a statistic, that's just a phrase. But the impact, if you do have one, can be life-threatening and life-changing. And that's where some of the anxiety comes from thinking, is it? Could it be? What if I've missed it? What if I'm being a hypochondriac? What if people think I'm ridiculous? What if I miss it? You go from one extreme to the other.
What advice would you give to someone who's scared to speak to their GP about their anxiety about blood clots?
So it's all very well me sitting here saying, don't be ruled by your anxiety. We've talked about the fact that the risk might be low, it might be high for you, but in general the risk is low, but the impact, if it happened, is high. I think taking control though, you own it. You own your body, you own the illness, whether you wanted to or not, and you've got to own how you react to it. But there's help out there. If the anxiety is too much, go and talk to somebody, go and talk to a mental health practitioner at your GP surgery or whatever. There's numbers that you can call, there's people that you can reach out to if the anxiety is really bad, before it gets to that stage even. But for me, it's about taking control of your illness, so managing your risk factors, doing things in the right way to know that you've prevented it as much as possible.
Is it normal to feel like you're overreacting, and how do you get past the feeling to take action anyway?
So I've spoken a little bit about the advice that I'd give to somebody who is really struggling with the anxiety of this. And I do see it on those Facebook groups, people who are absolutely tormented. So there are so many things to worry about with this. But people who are absolutely paralysed from fear, and that is in some ways not the way to live your life. In any way, it's not the way to live your life, but I understand it's really difficult when you get into that cycle where they are scared to exercise in case they dislodge a clot. Even if medical advice is after about 6 weeks, you should be fine. Obviously, each person needs to take their own advice, but when they've had that advice, they still can't quite trust to do it. And that's when it starts to become, in some ways, the anxiety is the worst problem than the condition, because it's stopping people doing the things that they want to do in their life, stopping them living an ordinary life, because they're worrying about what if and could it be.
Are there any techniques you recommend for managing your anxiety?
So what can you do? What are some of the suggestions to make managing that anxiety more easy? So there's some computer-based training that you can have that helps you understand the mechanisms of anxiety and how you can get it under control. It might be useful for you. Meditation, yoga, things that are calming in general. I don't particularly find that they help me. What helps me is to be busy and out there. I don't want to be alone too much with my thoughts, so I stay really busy whilst being quite vigilant. So that's one of the things that I do. So you've got to experiment a little bit to find out what it is that will help you manage your anxiety.
What are a few small signs people might miss when it comes to blood clots? Things that should maybe raise a flag?
And I described then the symptoms that you get in your leg if you've got a blood clot. You can get blood clots in your arms, you can get them in your kidneys, you can get a blood clot pretty much at the back of your eye. There are so many places that you can get them. Liver, it's quite terrifying to think of all the places in your body that you could have one and you don't know. Sometimes people don't have any symptoms at all to make them go to the doctors. But the one to really watch out for is any suggestion that it could have gone to, that there could be a clot that's gone to your lung. So shortness of breath, racing heart, feeling off and a bit unwell, and cough. Having those symptoms, means that you really must go and get checked. But at the same time, those symptoms could be symptoms of so many other infections, flu, that sort of thing, COVID. It's just really hard to tell. And as I said before, you don't want to be a hypochondriac. And I would imagine it's even worse if you recognise it in, the risk in your parents, your kids, your partner. It must, looking at them out of the corner of your eye and thinking, could that be a clot? And you don't want to frighten them. Again, what if you miss it? So I think knowing your own body, knowing the body of people that you care for, so that you can spot if something seems off, is really quite important. And knowing what the things are to look for, knowing what the symptoms are that could potentially indicate a clot, and then not hesitating to get some advice, I think is really important.
How much does ongoing anxiety impact your life today?
To be honest, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about whether I will get a clot. It's more, for me, it was more the effects on my family that have been devastating, both generations before and the generations that I didn't get. So I probably have more sadness than anxiety, but I have to be aware of it all of the time. I have to think about it when I'm flying. I couldn't get HRT, as we've talked about, so it impacts all of my life, but I don't think that I worry overly, but it's always there.
And lastly, once you've been reassured there is no clot, how do you manage the anxiety?
Yeah, to recap, find ways to manage your mental health and your anxiety, find ways to manage your condition, put all of the preparations that you can in place, and then get on with enjoying life to the fullest extent. It's a gift.